Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask an Architect. I'm your host, M. Mathis, and today I'm here with Amy Parencio. Hello, hello. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm glad to meet with you and to speak with you a little bit about just your life and career. So just to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about your educational background, your career, and how you got started?
Sure. Yeah. So I started as an architecture student at Washington State University, and also got involved with the AIS in my third year of the architecture program there. I remember so vividly the night that I decided to run for West Quad director. I was staying up probably for a midterm review or something, and saw the call come into my email, and we were headed to Forum that year. So I said, yeah, let's do it. And ran and was luckily elected, and served 2008 to 2009, so my fourth year of the undergrad program there, and that was a really transformative time for me in terms of getting to understand what leadership was as a student, and really enjoyed AIS in terms of just being able to connect with a bunch of people, not only in my university but outside of my university as well, and it really kind of set the trajectory of my career in a different way than it had I not run before. So just a plug there.
Yeah.
After I graduated from Washington State University, I knew I wanted to continue my education. Washington State was a 4+2 degree program, so I knew I had to get a master's degree in order to become a licensed architect, which was my original goal. And so I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon, where I'm currently still living, and went to school at the University of Oregon's Portland program to get my master's degree, mainly because I wanted to work while I was going to school. I really had this idea in my head that I wanted to apply what I was learning in academia directly to kind of practice, and then learning, what I was learning in the firm, and applying that to kind of the schoolwork that I was doing at University of Oregon. So I started working at ZGF Architects, where I still am working today, right when I started my grad degree. So I was working part-time, and then transitioned kind of full-time after I graduated. I've been at ZGF since then, so I think I'm coming up on 14 years this October, which is kind of crazy to think about, like, that amount of time. I've worked at ZGF on a variety of different project types, everything from kind of multifamily mixed use to U.S. governmental buildings overseas, to football operations buildings on higher education campuses, and hospitality. I had this idea in my head that I was going to be an architect, and I was always really passionate about this kind of idea of helping people grow and succeed in their careers, and that was really, I think, probably sparked by my time on the AIS board, and really kind of really wanting to help people kind of transition from academy to practice. And so I was always pushing on kind of different initiatives within the firm that would help kind of further our workplace culture and further kind of people's professional growth and development beyond just my own. And about 5 years ago was asked by our partners to kind of step away from the traditional practice of architecture and move into a role that really allowed me to act upon my passion. And so I've been able to do that in a more full-time role where I'm kind of straddling both practice and operations and people. So kind of in this, the in-between of everything, which has been really fun and rewarding in a completely different way. I still get to use a lot of the skills that I learned in architecture school, and skills that I learned, in my architecture upbringing in the profession. Creative problem solving, design problems that don't necessarily involve buildings anymore, but people and that side of things. So it's been really fun and rewarding, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, not many people have that fulfilling of a career, stay at a place that long and feel like this is my home and I love it, and feel like I'm constantly being just fulfilled as a person. I have a purpose here. That's so rare. So that's really awesome to hear. I'm very curious because it is also very rare that people start in architecture and stay in architecture. And I'm curious just what inspired your love for architecture, just even in youth, or was it, or did it happen when you were in college, and were you one major and switched to another? Like, how did that start?
Yeah. Oh, good question. I always like hated the question of like, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? It like evoked like some anxiety in me when I was in high school, because I saw a lot of different paths. I was interested in a lot of different things, and I had a really awesome physics teacher in high school that kind of spurred an interest in physics for me. So I actually started my undergrad career as a physics major, which was really fun. But also I felt like only utilized kind of half of me, right? Like, especially in the early physics courses, it was very dry science kind of oriented things. And so the creative kind of like artistic side of myself wasn't being utilized in that. And when I was looking forward, upon graduation and what that might look like as a physics major, I didn't see a path forward in terms of like the right job after graduation in physics for me. And so I had a couple friends in architecture when I was trying to kind of figure out what I was going to do that wasn't physics, that were trying to figure out what they wanted to do that wasn't architecture. And I realized very quickly that what they were talking about liking is something that really interested me. And I had a meeting with one of the professors in the architecture program to just kind of ask questions. And she really kind of talked broadly about kind of the idea of like being able to utilize that logical kind of problem solving mind, but then also be really creative and open to a bunch of different things. And so that really spoke to me. And then when, about a year and a half into my undergrad is when I switched into architecture. So I didn't know as a kid or growing up that I wanted to do architecture. I kind of just stumbled into it as a process of, trying other things first.
That's really interesting because I feel like a lot of people are like, I knew from birth. Something
Yeah.
I knew from birth. But I love that you kind of figured it out and it ended up really being your thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious because you seem to really have this emphasis on making this what could be a mundane process as creative as possible. And so how would you define your architectural like approach? And maybe even who has inspired it along the way? Was it some of those professors, or maybe was it people from childhood who you've applied things that they've taught you to now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be totally honest, right? Like I haven't practiced like the true practice of architecture in about 5 years. So for me, my mentors and the people that like I look up to probably are not like the traditional architects. They're the people who are running firms, or they're the ones that are doing really interesting things out there in the world outside of architecture in terms of how do you, train and develop and mentor and coach individuals. I have people in mind. It's hard to think of like narrow down the list, but like it's broader than just the architecture profession at this point. And I think it's always been that way in a sense, like in terms of the people that I've like connected with personally for mentorship, they've always been ones that are a little outside of the traditional path.
That's actually perfect because many of our members, they are trying to figure out how they want to take these skills and use them in their career. And
Yeah.
I'd like to know from you, just do you have any advice for students who are looking to take what they've learned in architecture and maybe do something that is untraditional?
Yeah. I would say the first step is really defining like what you're passionate about, right? Like and trying to figure out kind of like what would bring you the most joy in your work, and then figure out what would then be a job or something that you could do that would fulfill that. Sometimes those align and sometimes they don't necessarily align. And so it can be a combination of both your work and the things that you do in your life. So I feel like a lot of times, at least for me, and in I feel like growing up, even though I feel like I have a lot of growing up to do, in growing into this current state that I'm in, it always felt like there's a lot of emphasis on putting all of the eggs into like the career basket, in terms of like your career has to be the most fulfilling thing that you can have to do. And like there can be other things in your life that can add those fulfilling things. So for me, stepping away from like the true practice of architecture, I'm totally going on a side tangent, by the way. I'm not answering your question, but I'm kind of answering it in a way. Uh, it like I miss the creative practice of architecture because I'm not in it as much as I like. I'm on the periphery, right? And so in my personal life, I've then been able to kind of fill in with other things, like learning how to sew my own clothes and using that as like the design and creative practice that I was missing in my current role. And so that you can kind of go like, okay, this career is great and it fulfills me in certain ways, and then I can add in and fill in those gaps where I see them as well. So if you're looking to move outside of architecture, one, consider, obviously what brings you the most joy and what will fulfill you, but then know that like, even if it doesn't check all the boxes, there could be other ways of checking those boxes as well.
I love that. Yeah, you have to find the motivation in other ways, not just in the job itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm curious. I would like to take it back to work a little bit. And because you've done traditional and you're kind of doing untraditional now, you've been doing it for the past 5 years or so. Could you tell me what a day or an average day of work looked like when you were doing the traditional thing, and what an average day looks like today?
Sure. I think it depends on the project phase, right? So when I was working on projects and stuff, it really depended on the project phase. So I was at ZGF, everyone kind of works on projects from the very beginning all the way to the end. There's specialists that kind of plug in at different phases, but for the most part, most staff kind of work on projects all the way through. And so the last project I was working on before transitioning was a hotel project in Portland, Oregon. And so my typical day probably depended on what time of the project it was, or what phase of work. So anything from design studies of the exterior facade, and really kind of getting into kind of like the diagram of the building very early on, and so working with the senior designer on hand sketches and like really kind of supporting that effort, to then being able to detail out the facade and work with the consultants to make sure that NEP was coordinated with the structural systems, and then taking it all the way through construction administration and being the one to go out on site and lead that process for our team. So I think any one given time, a day looks very different, which is one reason why I love architecture, right? Like there's obviously like this cadence that occurs for each project that you get to kind of repeat with different parameters and different kind of different types of projects and different clients and things, but there's still that kind of cadence. But within that cadence of a project, each day looks slightly different based off of the needs of that phase. And so that's, I'd say, one of the reasons why I loved doing what I did before. Now, I really kind of I manage a group of architects within our Portland office. And so that requires a lot of different things, including kind of the staffing and making sure that everyone is utilized. It includes like the personnel conversations, hard conversations about performance. It's the working with our partners to strategically look at kind of where we need to grow people in order to then market them in the future. Where does someone need, support in their growth? And then also recruiting side of it, and making sure that we're filling the holes internally that we don't necessarily, if we don't have internally, we'll have to go out and look for those individuals. So depending on any given day, it could look different. I'm in constant conversation with my teammates across the firm, and then also the partners, and then the project managers that I work with within the Portland office as well, and then staff. So a typical day could look like, a meeting with our managing partner in the Portland office, to then taking a staff member out to coffee to talk about kind of their next project, to then jumping back in and having an AXP conversation with someone. Yeah, it ranges. And it really is dependent too, like in terms of, where workload is. So if there's too much work and not enough staff, then it's really focused on recruiting and filling in those gaps. But if there's not enough work and too much staff, then we're trying to kind of like spread the wealth and trying to figure out kind of how to keep people utilized. So even within this role, there's less of that project cadence in terms of that, you know, the working hard towards a deadline and feeling of a completion. It's much more of like a constant kind of like, there's no one deadline because there's always a deadline kind of thing.
Sounds like just a little bit more constant up and down, ebb and flow in your current position now, which sounds like it doesn't get boring.
No, it certainly doesn't.
I'm curious, because it sounds like you have a lot going on, and even back in the day, it sounded like you had a lot going on then too. Do you have any advice for future architects or future architect adjacent people? How to balance all of the work?
Whoa. I've struggled with that for like most of my life. I think there's a point in which you like everyone has to learn to like learn their limits, right? And like that takes saying yes to a certain amount of things to finally go like, oh, here's my edge, right? And here's what I can accomplish, or this is what I is feasible for me. And that looks different for each individual. Saying yes to too many things will stretch you too far, so you may be less successful in all the things that you say yes to, and then that then at that point requires you to say no to stuff. And what I like to always remember is like saying yes to one thing is saying no to a bunch of other things. And so instead of like thinking about the yes as like, okay, here's this next opportunity that I'm saying yes to that then is like going to lead to other things, the yes is actually kind of like saying no to a bunch of other stuff too. And so being really thoughtful about what you say yes to is going to be really helpful in creating those boundaries and really kind of allowing the time to either really focus on those things that you say yes to or give you the opportunity to explore other things as well. And that's helped me in recent years too, in terms of going, okay, like this has served me well. And then, you know, also assessing kind of what you've done in the past and like, if it continues as a kind of regular occurrence, it's okay to kind of like have those moments where you're like, okay, here are the things on my plate. Are they still serving me in my growth? Or is this still something that brings me joy? And if the answer is, well, maybe, or no, then that's probably a good indicator to say, okay, well, after this period of time ends, or after this committee appointment ends, maybe you don't say yes to the next one. And so I've gone through phases of that in my career as well, where I'm like, okay, here's a period of time where I'm going to just kind of say no to things and focus on something else.
I love that. I really love that advice, because I feel like a lot of people are like, hop on to the first thing you get, but it is important to be thoughtful about the things that you are doing. Yeah, because it really could be stopping you from a multitude of other things. Excuse me, Jesus Christ. I'm curious. I'm curious about everything, huh? But I'd like to know, what would you say is the most difficult thing about your profession?
Ooh. Now in my non-traditional practice, or the most difficult thing in traditional practice?
Both. I'd love to know both.
Okay. Well, actually, maybe it's the same for both. It's the people stuff. Like, I think that architecture school, like, is really great for two things, right? Or it's great for a lot of things, but it teaches people how to think creatively and learn how to design. And then it also teaches like the technical skills and like, you know, the minimum criteria for like learning how to be an architect. And that's great. But there's like the people, the soft skills, it's the emotional intelligence, it's like the building of self-awareness as an individual. Those things aren't necessarily taught, but those are so important. And I think that some of the most difficult days are days where I have to have a hard conversation with someone. They're also the most rewarding days. Like no matter which way the conversation goes, it's still like you go through this period of time where you're like, for me, like now, if I'm prepping for like a conversation with someone, then I have to give them, you know, tough feedback about like, say they're not doing what was required, or they're not performing to the role that was expected of them before. And so talking through that with them and helping them understand in clear terms. So, I mean, communication is probably another thing that's really like important and also difficult. that's something that I had to learn on the job versus like, and maybe like it's also part of kind of like my like peripheral kind of upbringing, right? Like professional development doesn't have to happen in architecture or in the firm that you're working in. This is like another tangent probably.
No, please go on.
So like AIS really like was one of those moments for me when I was on the national board to be able to kind of go like, oh, okay, like I'm learning how to be a professional within a context that isn't necessarily like in a firm. And so I continued to kind of work on and figure out ways that I could stay connected within the profession at a broad level to either maximize my impact of my volunteer hours. And like, so I volunteered for NAB and did accreditation visits both as a student, and then I was actually asked to be on the NAB board as a director, which then led into kind of volunteering for NCARB on various committees over the years.
Wow.
And all of those things and interacting with other people that are beyond kind of just the firm have allowed me to learn how to communicate with people, how to have hard conversations. And so that kind of has like led to me being much more effective in that. But I'd still say the most difficult thing is being open to criticism, open to giving criticism, and not criticism, but giving feedback, because feedback could be positive as well, and being really clear in communicating. And that takes, you know, self-awareness of where you're arriving into that like conversation. It takes empathy, it takes listening skills, it takes all of that. Yeah.
In an architecture setting, what do you think is the best way to overcome maybe a fear of confrontation and a fear of talking to people?
Just doing it.
Okay.
I feel like I still remember like my first couple years at ZGF and like first couple years in the profession, like while I was either still in school or out of school. And I really like, I struggled with confidence, and I struggled with that, like, that self-talk, right? Like I'd leave a conversation and go like, wow, why did I just say that? Or like, oh, those words came out so wrong. Or like, you know, like the kind of like internal dialogue, and like confronting that and being like confronting it with compassion was really important. And like, I still have those feelings, even if I leave a hard conversation, I'm like, oh, that could have gone better. But then also kind of thinking, flipping the script and going like, okay, well, like, how did it go well, or like focusing on different things too, and that gets easier with time, and those thoughts dissipate with practice. Feedback and hard conversations don't have to always be negative either, right? Like it could be a hard conversation, or it could be giving someone great feedback. So if you're a junior person working on a project and you are given like maybe like a summer intern for the first time to work with, as like you're starting to grow your team leadership skills, right? And that practice starts then, and like giving them both positive feedback and also the feedback that they need to hear in order for growth is part of the process. And I think creating that like constant conversation and dialogue of feedback is important, so that you're not just approaching them when it is a negative time or when they need the constructive time. It's also being really clear about when they're doing things really well. And so that, I think that helps too, because you've created that conversation from the start.
Yeah, build a rapport, like talk to people outside of terrible situations, you know, talk to people as people. And then when you have to come to them with difficult situations, it's on a people level.
You said that's much more clearly than I could have.
No, I'm just trying to make sure that I got it. And yeah, no, you said that beautifully. Thank you. And I think that will motivate a lot of our members who have that fear, because a lot of people do. Pandemic didn't help, you know? So yeah, a lot of people are dealing with that currently. So thank you for that. I'd like to turn it around. So we talked about what's kind of difficult about the career. So what would you say is the best thing about your career?
Probably the people I get to work with. And like, it is the people side of things. I think, getting to like, especially now, I'm getting to be an advocate for people and getting to place people in growth opportunities, like because I get to do the staffing, right? Like I get to like be the one to really listen to people's like hopes and dreams for their future, and like hear their growth goals, and try to really marry that with the needs of the firm. And when that happens, there's this magic, right? Like you can watch someone step into a role that they're a little nervous for, but they're set up for success. They've had the right, preparation from the previous project work they've done, and to see them kind of step into that new role for the first time and own it and really see their growth and see their careers take off in a different way, that's really special. And yeah, I don't know, that's probably one of my favorite things about what I do right now.
Yeah, that's really cool that you give people opportunities. That is really special. That's really awesome.
Definitely.
Okay, so how can our members reach you, follow what you're doing, get to know you? How can they keep up with you?
In terms of keeping in contact or
social media, if you have anything that you want people to follow, where can they go?
Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, they can follow ZGF on all of our platforms. ZGF.com is our website, and then all of our social platforms are linked from there. So I would start at our website. I did talk a little about my sewing, and the journey of we didn't really talk broadly about that, but I did create an Instagram to document all of the clothes that I've been making. It started when I was a kid. I kind of always was really interested in sewing and was passionate about it, but in the pandemic I really kind of dove deep into learning how to sew, and I even sewed my own wedding dress last year, which was really fun and felt like a culmination of all the learning I had done over the 2 years prior. And so that's on social media, on Instagram, and it's Maison Domino, and that's my username. So you can follow me there if you want. Maison Domino obviously is Corbusier's idea of post-war housing, which was the first kind of idea of prefab, kind of where it's a structure that the inhabitants can kind of decide how to fill in the walls. And I kind of think of the human body is the same way, right? We clothe ourselves in the way that we want, and obviously there's only so many ways you can clothe a body, but it's a structure that is left by the inhabitant to be enclosed or clothed. And so that's where the name kind of comes from, and also kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of reference to all the fashion houses in Paris and stuff.
Yeah. I love that's super creative. Yeah, you put out I see that you're using your creative side in different outlets, and that's very awesome. And please send me that username so I can the spelling of it, so I can make sure to tag it. Okay,
sure, that sounds great.
Last question. What is your hottest take on architecture?
Whoa. This take on architecture. What do you mean?
Some people, maybe a hot take would be the word moist is actually a beautiful word, and I love the sound of it.
Oh, okay. Okay. We are only as good as the people who we who do the work, right? And maybe this is obviously my non-traditional bent coming back, but it's really true, right? We work for people, our clients are people, and so getting to know them and understanding the work that they do and the importance that it brings to the world is key in the work in doing good work. But then it's also about the people you work with, and making sure that you work for a company that really values people, I think is important. So that's my hot take.
Okay, you hear that? Caring about people, you must. So
yeah.
That which can be a hot take, in this world, unfortunately. So,
yeah.
Well, this has been Ask an Architect. I've been in Mathis speaking with Amy Parentio. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. You have a good one. And this is the end. All right, bye-bye, everyone.